Viewer discretion is advised.
What can you say about Joel Embiid, other than that his McDonald's and candy quarantine diet will probably ruin the offensive spacing when they come back? What are you gonna do about that joke? Cry about it? And for everyone who has given me shit about the process, your clapbacks have been about as accurate and as likely as a Ben Simmons 3 or a Markelle Fultz free throw. The process you seem to so deeply stand has yielded 2 playoff series wins, and judging by your 39-26 record this season, each bounce of this shot was a tap on the nail that put an end to your bullshit system. This was a small arena, but trust me, it was lit. That's because after it was abandoned, it was destroyed by arson in 1983 and was burned to the ground. Damn, son. Since 2007, the site has been a housing complex.
Franklin, Philadelphia. A pretty bland and boring dog mascot here. Why the hell is he blue? He also has a cold, dead stare on his face. I'm sure it's great for kids. Rating, 2.5 out of 10. Philadelphia 76ers, Wilt Chamberlain. There are arguments to be had for Dr. J, Moses Malone, Allen Iverson, and Charles Barkley, but I ultimately went with the guy who did the sex with 20,000 different women, supposedly. Wilt only played 3.5 seasons for the 76ers, but in that time span, he won 3 MVPs and a championship. He also led the league in assists 1 year for good measure. He dominated to such an intense degree I couldn't ignore it. It would have been even more of a no-brainer had Philly not choked away a 3-1 lead to Boston in the 1968 Eastern Conference Finals, but we all can't have nice things, I guess. I still find it hilarious that Wilt got tired of scoring so many points, so he willingly became an all-around player. What a fascinating individual. Philadelphia 76ers, Markelle Fultz. Fultz remains a complete mystery to me. When a player is picked first overall, they usually had a notable college career that generated a lot of attention, but not Fultz. I don't ever remember him even being talked about. Still, Philly took him first overall in 2017 to pair with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, and it was a disaster. Fultz dealt with mysterious shoulder issues that completely ruined his shooting form. All in all, he appeared in just 33 games for Philly, finishing with more shot attempts than points. He's only been marginally better in Orlando, and I feel his time in the NBA is running out. Philadelphia 76ers. Joel Embiid just flopped through my living room window as I said this. The 76ers spent an entire decade bragging about the process, and for what? Really, what has it gotten them? A couple second-round exits? Embiid is a fucking disgrace to watch with all his flopping and ref baiting, and has consistently gotten hurt and played worse in the playoffs his entire career. He's still never played multiple playoff series in the same season without missing a game. He's the actual street clothes that people call Anthony Davis. Oh yeah, James Harden's on the team too, but he's fat and washed up, so who cares? Good luck winning with Doc Rivers as your coach.
This, he called, the process. A perpetual 5-year plan where every single asset that they have will line up like the cosmos and turn the team into a juggernaut overnight. The next year, they draft another injured center in Joel Embiid, who will surely be the face of the franchise. Even with this coup d'etat, his fingerprints of failure are apparent. The 76ers are still garbage. He is a true bronzed god of second-round picks and rights to foreign players who will probably never see an NBA court. Philadelphia. A city once beset with agony and frustration has been blessed with good fortune. The Eagles finally broke through and shed the monkey off of their back. The Flyers have soared to playoff contention even if they frustrate the living hell out of everyone. The Phillies are actually doing things. And then the 76ers. The story is as well known as Shakespeare, but a brief refresher. The Sixers were mired in futility for years after the disastrous reign of Billy King. They weren't good enough to compete for a championship, yet had an incredibly slim shot of acquiring the talent needed to get them over that hump. Enter Sam Hinkie and the process. Over the span of several years, they roll the tanks out like it's the revival of Operation Barbarossa. They were a laughingstock as they became the doormat of the league. In fact, the NBA got so tired of their shit that they ousted Sam Hinkie and installed a new regime in his place. But regardless of the losing, it was always about the end game. That would justify the means of getting there, we were told. Let's move forward a few years since Hinkie's public execution. The Philadelphia 76ers aren't a championship contender yet, but they have a lot of intrigue. The team is surging in an admittedly top-heavy Eastern Conference and has finally broken out of the basement of the NBA. Led by young stars like Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, the process has reached the second step. In fact, they have clinched a playoff spot for the first time in 6 years. And this isn't just a team sneaking in as the 8th seed, they've been convincingly dominating teams. Looking at them now, you can see the promise that this team exudes when everyone is actually healthy. And there lies the big catch to this evolution. The 76ers have had an unironically healthy dose of injury troubles. Ben Simmons is a strong candidate for Rookie of the Year and is also turning into a promising piece to carry the 76ers into relevance, since he's healthy this year. Markelle Fultz should be yet another player to help out, once again when he's fully healthy. Joel Embiid was one of the guys that really caught my eye when I was watching footage from the 76ers for the vid I did last year. He struck me as a big man that could dominate the league for years, when he stays healthy. Thus lies the ultimate caveat. They're finally getting healthy. As mentioned, Embiid has managed to stay mostly healthy. Mostly. When he's not on the court, the Sixers feel it. They lack his presence and ability to generate space for his teammates. Ben Simmons is flaunting that great upside he had out of college, and I have a feeling that he has a higher level to reach. Dario Saric looking pretty solid. Not a franchise face, but a quality starting caliber player on a playoff team. Markelle Fultz has returned to the court. He obviously isn't 100%, but at this point he is much needed depth for the playoff run. The Sixers have, in reinforcing things, added talent. I know, it's a strange thing to say after years of trading everything with value, but they've acquired veterans like Marco Bellinelli and Ersan Ilyasova to come off the bench. That's not even counting shooting specialist JJ Redick, whom they picked up in free agency. This is a team that is looking to be noticed by the league's elite. With how the Eastern Conference is this year, they've got a shot at winning a series, maybe two. They're not at the point of being finals contenders just yet, but there's potential for it, especially with the Los Angeles pick still in their arsenal. It will be tough to get to that next point, but if they can stay relatively healthy, I think it's a legit possibility. Fuck you, LeBron. Here come the 76ers. Since the team is thriving and the process has begun to blossom into what it was supposed to be, you are probably asking if my opinion has changed on Sam Hinkie. The answer is simply no. The issue I have with Hinkie is that he didn't do anything truly groundbreaking. All he executed was simply a far more aggressive version of tanking. It might be because I always did this sort of thing on the old franchise modes when I was a kid. Blow a team up and then rebuild them into a championship contender. Obviously differing circumstances, but Hinkie definitely deserved the criticism he got. Tanking was always a taboo in the sports world. If there were ever allegations of it, people looked down on that team. It was always viewed as tainted, that they didn't earn the elite player they drafted because of it. The Sixers ended up being successful in this regard by winning the draft lottery in what is turning out to be a very subpar draft class. What Hinkie did was more akin to a sales pitch, except that the team will be terrible for a few years in the hopes of a potential long-term payoff. Even if you don't mind tanking, there was a legitimate issue I have with Hinkie's reign. He wasn't into team building, he was into asset management. Sam Hinkie didn't really take an interest in scheme fits or player roles or even developing the talent that he got. Thus was why it was baffling when he drafted 3 straight big men with no positional flexibility with premium draft picks. Although he hit on one of them, the other 2 suffered as a result. Nerlens Noel stagnated in development and was traded to Dallas for mere pennies of what he was worth. Jahlil Okafor became such a negative commodity that he was borderline untradeable. The guy looks completely lost and has regressed in almost all areas of play. When you can't get playing time for the goddamn Nets, there's a serious issue. You also have to remember that Embiid nearly retired because of lingering injuries before he stepped onto an NBA court as well. Hindsight is 20/20, but imagine this team potentially having Porzingis and the Greek Freak. The 76ers would be a championship contender right now. Thus is the problem with whiffing on such picks. Hinkie was all about value exploitation, such as when he acquired Nick Stauskas and bloated salaries from Sacramento for a few picks. I attribute that more to Vlade Divac being a fucking idiot than Hinkie. If there was one thing I will give him credit for, it's for selling high on Michael Carter-Williams. It was a move that puzzled a lot of us, but it appears that the guy isn't the player that was sold to Milwaukee and is nothing more than a bench guy on his 4th team in 4 years. Even then, we still don't know what return Philly got for the Lakers pick since it's always been top 3 protected. This year should be the year that allows us to find out the bounty though. For guys that could be considered as finds, like Robert Covington or TJ McConnell, that's just a side effect of guys taking advantage of playing time that they wouldn't have gotten on any other team. If it weren't for the process, guys like these may be bouncing around from team to team or playing in the G League or Europe. What will be felt for a while to come, however, is his influence. People see how Hinkie's plan has worked, and we are now at the point where roughly a third of the fucking NBA is in some way or form tanking. If you need a quick argument at how the league has no parity, look at what is occurring here. Even the league itself is disgusted with this and is trying to stop it, but it's too late. In a franchise mode, you try and find the loophole to exploit in order to maximize performance. Sam Hinkie found that loophole. I think Hinkie will get another chance to prove his mettle as a GM somewhere along the road. That is, if the NBA still isn't pissy about the process. Maybe my opinion on him will turn with that, but I credit Brian Colangelo more with building the team that the 76ers are. Hinkie brought the pieces, but Colangelo assembled the puzzle, if you will. Who knows how Sam would have performed if he was allowed to keep the job? Does he try to build a team, or does he sell players off at peak value like most others he had? We may find out that answer in the future. Trust the process? Hopefully.
Will launch the last shot of the season from downtown and connect. That'll do it. The Boston Celtics move on.
Wasn't this what they were trying to avoid? Transport yourself back to the early days of the process and you'll hear the same thing. They don't want to be stuck in the same hamster wheel as years past. It's why they were doing what they were doing in their relentless tank. But to see it now is merely torture. They had a brief blip of promise into something greater than what they were, but now they're just another team. Now, a little disclaimer that I've done a few other vids on this team before. I've never been a fan of the process, but I was noticing they were starting to turn the corner in 2018, and for good reason. They had a potential trio that could bring them a championship, and were starting to bolster the depth for postseason runs. I ended up praising Brian Colangelo for the work he had done in bridging the gap between Hinkie's tanking and forging a contender. This fine take of mine did not backfire. Did not backfire. In absolutely no way blew up in my face whatsoever. I never knew something could age worse than rancid milk, and after just a few months of release, with Brian Colangelo's love for burner accounts revealed to the world, the Sixers needed to scramble to find a new GM. This new guy was headed into an interesting situation. They had two emerging talents in Embiid and Simmons, they still had some draft capital from the Hinkie era, and they had depth that could make them a threat in the postseason. You maneuver well enough, you could make this team into a legit contender. To move them to the next level, they promoted Elton Brand to the role. Yes, you heard that correctly. A man who had just retired several years earlier and was only the GM for their G League team for 1 year. A team that finished tied for dead last in said G League. Now perhaps I'm being too harsh. The G League means absolutely nothing in terms of managerial performance, and he allegedly made a strong impression in his interview with the team owners. It's not like they've made any drastic changes or mistakes in the past, and that's where I find the Sixers' main problem to lie. Their failures are not solely on Hinkie. They're not fully on Colangelo. They're not fully on Brand. Philadelphia's issue is that they've had three completely differing visions. Each of these three individuals have done their own thing without any sort of cohesion or gradual succession plan. Sam Hinkie chose to deliberately tank to secure futures. Brian Colangelo tried to mend the bridge and do whatever he did. And Elton Brand threw all caution into the wind and decided to go all in for a championship, regardless of if they were ready or not. This issue falls solely on ownership. There was never a set plan or outline for successors to follow. Just handing a stock portfolio to a random guy and saying, "It's your call now, have fun, just make us money." But that's not enough to cause a cascade. As for a key point to where they fell, many will point to trading up with Boston to draft Markelle Fultz. And it was. The problem with blaming it solely on this is that you couldn't predict at the time that Fultz's shoulder was going to go foobar and develop the yips. Remember, at the time of the draft, pundits and fans alike were hailing the trade as a slam dunk for the Sixers. Although foresight is impossible, his issues have been well profiled. Some say it was the pressure of being a top pick. Some say a career-threatening nerve issue. There was a diagnosis of thoracic outlet syndrome. Regardless of what it was, Philly was too hasty in branding him a bust. I get why, though. He was supposed to be the final piece to a great championship core. The culmination of the process, Hinkie's vision finally being realized. When he flopped miserably, Brand shipped off Fultz to the Orlando Magic for mere pennies of his talent and draft pedigree. Think of how history could have changed if Fultz was as advertised. They don't trade for Jimmy Butler. They keep Saric and Covington. Their depth is fortified by homegrown talent. They're perennial championship contenders. So it's not really a case of poor judgment, but rotten luck. It's especially since Fultz is starting to regain his old form with the Magic. I don't know if he'll be able to realize his potential, but he's at least a playable option at the time, unlike in Philly. What makes this even worse is the guy Boston drafted with the pick Philly traded to them, Jason Tatum. More on him later. Despite much optimism regarding the Brand hire, it's quite obvious to see nowadays. He's nowhere near ready for a GM role. He's forcing old school techniques and practices in the modern game. It can be shown in his trades, where you can make the argument that he gave up way too much for players on expiring deals. The Jimmy Butler deal wasn't as bad since they desperately needed a star perimeter player and Saric and Covington were replaceable, but the Tobias Harris deal was a tough price to pay. Harris was one of the better players on the market, but to trade the last of the draft capital accrued by Hinkie plus a promising guard in Landry Shamet? It was an all-in push. But was it truly the right call? Look at the core they're trying to push. Ben Simmons has talent that cannot be denied. However, there is a glaring issue with his game. He either cannot or outright refuses to take jump shots. In the age of the three-pointer, this is borderline fatal, regardless of his skill with the ball. Until he can develop a jump shot, Simmons will be unable to reach his true potential. Joel Embiid is a well-rounded player, but his problem is the same one that's been laid on him since he was drafted: durability. He's missed time in each season either due to injuries, rest, or a combination of the above. With those additions and a patchwork of reasonable depth, they were expected to make a serious push for the NBA championship. Unfortunately, there was a certain man that had other plans.
It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?
That was your shot. It's a shame. It was a damn good series against the Raptors, even if you didn't win the series. Not that it won't make you feel any better, but that team did end up winning the NBA title. Perhaps in a different timeline, it's the Sixers that win it all. Then we're talking a different story, about how the process was finally justified after years of derision. Philadelphia would never shut the fuck up about them, and the NBA is worse off due to teams trying to imitate their success, but that's just me. This upcoming offseason was one of the most crucial in the history of the organization. Big decisions had to be made regarding their trade acquisitions, team identity, Brett Brown, and what the future would hold for a team on the precipice of success. And the key objective for this team was clear. They had to re-sign Jimmy Buckets. His role was critical to not only ball movement, but giving the team a balanced approach. They failed. They couldn't get him to sign with the team. Butler would point to Brett Brown as the reason he wouldn't sign. If that's the case, why didn't they chuck him out? I'd say Butler was critical, much more than the coach Sixers fans wanted fired to begin with. But alas, it was not meant to be. He would be part of a sign-in trade to Miami. The Sixers would receive a downgrade in Josh Richardson. As a result of the Butler deal, Elton Brand either got delusional or outright desperate. Tobias Harris was another guy Philly wanted to sign. And they got him. At a price high enough to give most basketball fans an aneurysm. Now Harris is a solid support guy, but who the hell pays that an average of $36 million per year for 5 years with no team options? Why do I get the feeling that they were bidding against themselves? If that were it, fine, but it gets worse. For their big free agent splash, they don't go for a position of need. They double down on net front presence with Al Horford, a bruising center formerly on arrival in his mid-30s and starting to decline. Brand threw an average of $27 million per year at him for 4 years. A redundant luxury good. Do you know how much luxury tax that the Sixers may end up paying in the future? As a result of these big signings, JJ Redick, their three-point specialist, was allowed to leave in free agency. Many saw a potential champion in the making, but the Sixers became incredibly one-dimensional and bloated. All this talent is great and all, but who the hell's going to shoot threes? Embiid? Some dude from the G League? That's the question we all got to see play out in real time as the Sixers struggled immensely. Everyone said it was a failure to live up to potential, but part of me had a feeling this would play out. Once again, they were one-dimensional. Horford and Embiid can't coexist on the court together. Tobias Harris is good at $15 million per year, a total liability at $36 million per year. Ben Simmons is still allergic to jump shots. And he also has a major extension coming next season. Pretty good for being unable to take jump shots. I also have to mention that he got injured just before the playoffs and underwent knee surgery. A flawed team just became even more flawed. Which is where the Boston Celtics, also known as this team's Grim Reaper, come back into play. Do you remember Jason Tatum? He's the cornerstone of the Celtics franchise at this point in time. The 76ers are completely outplayed and outmatched at every angle. It's no surprise that they're swept, but it merely reinforces what they had become. Just another team spinning the wheels of futility. This was the fate they were trying to avoid. That's what all the years of god-awful Sixers teams were about, remember? So they wouldn't get swept by the Boston Celtics in the first round 5 years down the road. All those lost years full of tanking, I fear that they were for nothing. The rainbow only leads to a bottomless chasm. And it's their own damn fault for it. Over the past year, I've been thinking more and more about something. What would Sam Hinkie have done if he weren't forced out by the NBA? Would he have maintained course and trusted his vision of the process? Would he have simply done what Colangelo did and tried to build the team back up? Or would he have seen that the current core wasn't going to work and re-roll for more futures? Remember, there was a time where many people thought Joel Embiid was never going to play a game in the NBA. It's not entirely out of question. Any way you look at it, the years of tanking were all for naught at this point. The process is dead. It technically has been since Kawhi shot in Game 7, but this season sealed its fate. The Sixers fan base doesn't get much sympathy from me. They were incredibly obnoxious during the whole affair, but even I must admit this truth. They were bamboozled. sold nothing but snake oil to be excited for and sell tickets to an outright terrible team for years. They were given the false promise of riches beyond their wildest dreams. And all it cost them was a few years of their time and organizational credibility. Even Charles Ponzi couldn't come up with a better scheme to dupe the masses. So in the end, you have a fan base completely disillusioned with the team and demanding heads to roll. Sure, there may be some that simply think firing Brett Brown is going to bring the Sixers back to their former promise, but he's far from the only problem on this team. It goes a hell of a lot further than that. And to cure this ailment, you'll have to gut everything, including ownership, and reboot the franchise again. Are they going to even want to retrust the process so soon after the original one?